During this course, I will first explain what trauma is and provide some examples of what counts as trauma. Next, we'll identify ways in which the impacts of trauma may be evident in the classroom. And after that, we'll start to get practical. I'll share both trauma-informed behavior management strategies and instructional approaches that can support the participation of trauma-affected students. To finish up, I'll explain the responsibilities you have as a teacher to report suspected trauma and how to do it. So, what is trauma? Trauma is commonly defined as an experience, be it prolonged or momentary, that causes deep distress. Trauma can be thought of as a continuum. You can see, with the open-ended nature of that definition, why we would think of trauma as a continuum. We're talking about a range of experiences and the concept of distress, which will be subjective based on the characteristics of individuals who are experiencing the events. Even when laid out along a continuum, trauma is still a subjective concept. The impact of trauma, whether it has lasting effects, and how it influences normal functioning, is not only a result of the severity and duration of the traumatic experience, it is also a result of an individual's resilience and support system. So, while one student may witness their mother being assaulted by a stepfather on an ongoing basis, that traumatic experience may only impact that child briefly and have no lasting impact if that child is very resilient. Also, a child who is traumatized in a severe sense, but who has a strong support system and people they know believe in them, may also not experience any ongoing impact on normal functioning. On the other hand, a child who is not resilient and who does not have a strong support system may be vulnerable to lasting impacts of less severe trauma. So with that caveat, let's take a look at the continuum. On one end of this continuum is minor trauma. This type of trauma may be something that plenty of normally functioning people have experienced. It causes slight and brief distress. It's usually an isolated event that allows for a quick recovery and no lasting or permanent impact. Examples of this type of trauma include isolated traumatic events like breaking a bone, or briefly bearing witness to the trauma of another person or persons, for example, witnessing a car crash. On the other end of the spectrum is severe and impactful trauma. This type of trauma causes significant and typically ongoing distress. Trauma that has a severe impact on normal functioning may be repetitive and intense. Examples of severe trauma that have a lasting impact may be ongoing physical abuse or ongoing neglect. You can imagine a child experiencing these things is on high alert and in survival mode. That brings me to my next point. Why does trauma have this impact? What's happening in the brain? The traumatized brain releases the stress hormone cortisol. It's the body's response to fear. That's actually normal and served the purpose of helping early humans survive. Our students, however, are probably not at risk of being attacked by a predatory animal. This once useful survival mechanism can become problematic if it occurs too often. When the brain is in what I'll call high alert, the body is too.
The brainstem,
also known as the lizard brain, is the part of the brain responsible for regulating our body's responses to fear, like heart rate, blood pressure, and respiration. When a child experiences ongoing and severe trauma, their bodies are more often on higher alert or experiencing the physical response of fear. Their baseline vitals, or their resting heart rate, blood pressure, and respiration, may be elevated. This can impact the development of the higher areas of functioning in the brain, the areas responsible for things like planning, emotional regulation, and organization, or problem solving. Therefore, what teachers and other caregivers need to know is that people who have experienced severe trauma, that is, severe enough to cause the ongoing disruption of baseline biological functions, may not have developed the structures in their brain necessary to perform important skills required for success in school. That is, they may not have developed, or at least not fully, the abilities to control impulses, regulate their emotions, stay organized, and solve social problems. The awesome news is that brains are malleable. When trauma-affected students learn and repeat appropriate coping strategies, their brains can actually form new, more helpful pathways. What types of experiences cause the brain's fear response? Lots, really. Many things can count as trauma. The important thing to remember is that the ongoing impacts of trauma will depend on the severity, duration, victim's resilience, and victim's support system. Examples of what is considered trauma include, but are not limited to, serious illness or disease, serious injury, like getting into a car wreck or even just spraining an ankle, bearing witness to the trauma of others, such as domestic violence or bullying, sexual or physical abuse directed at the victim. This is a commonly discussed version of trauma and may be what comes to mind when teachers consider the trauma their students may experience. Another example is neglect, meaning when a child does not receive the basic requirements for survival. Another example is surviving a natural disaster and/or alterations in the family dynamic, such as the death of a family member, divorce, or even just moving from one town, state, or country to another. You can see, once again, how subjective the concept of trauma can be. Regardless, it is important for teachers to understand the relationship between these life experiences, the impact they have on brain development, and the subsequent behaviors and difficulties that affect their traumatized students. So far, I've shared some basics about trauma. We looked at what it is, what can cause it, and examples of traumatic experiences. Stay tuned for the next video where I share ways students' experiences with trauma can manifest as behaviors and learning difficulties in the classroom. Later, we'll delve into what you can do about it with behavior management and instructional strategies, as well as reporting the suspected trauma.